So you ready to get stuck in with Carveco Maker? Well, let's go. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of James Dean Designs. If you are new to the channel, love laser or CNC, make sure you hit that little subscribe button in the corner to get all the latest tips, tricks, tutorials and reviews. Now in today's episode we are getting stuck in with Carveco Maker. Now I previously did the installation video, link is in the corner if you've not yet installed your software, but today we're going to go from start to finish in creating a job through to getting everything exported ready for your CNC machine. Now when I did a dry run of this, it is a pretty long tutorial, so I've broken it down into two parts. In part one, we're going to create our first model. We're going to take a look at the user interface within Carveco and see where everything sits and start to work through some of the basic drawing tools in order to create our first job. In part two, we're going to finish that project off, see about generating toolpaths and using some of the tool features that are in there, and then ultimately get everything exported ready to run on our CNC machine. So obviously do check out both parts, and if you want to skip ahead to sections, obviously use the slider or the chapters in the description area below. But for now, let's get stuck in and start to see what Carveco Maker is all about.
So when you first open Carveco, it may look something like this and open up on the Help menu. It may open up on the Recent Models menu, but as you have not yet created any projects, you will not have anything display in this area. Now typically we'd go straight to New Model and start creating, but before we do so, I just want to show you this Options menu. Now in here you will find a lot of common settings for within Carveco. For the time being, most of them you can ignore, but come all the way down to the bottom and you will see this Auto Recover Settings menu. Expand it out and make sure that it is enabled. This will do an auto save every 30 minutes when your mouse has been inactive for 30 seconds, and I can guarantee you at some point it will save you recovering a lot of work. You can obviously reduce this time down to something like 15 or 20 minutes if you wanted to save more frequently. For now we will close this and we will go up to New Model. Now a very important thing we need to note here is this is the size of the material you are working with, not the size of the work area for your machine. You can switch between millimeters and inches. For today we're going to leave it in millimeters. I'm going to set the width of this to 200 millimeters wide by 100 millimeters high. So this is small enough to fit on the bed of a 3018 machine. Next we have resolution. Within Carveco, it can simulate your jobs in a 3D work environment. This basically means it will give you a realistic idea of how your job is going to output. And this setting is all about how much detail that simulation contains. Now most of the time you'll want to keep this as high as possible to get as realistic output in that simulation as possible. But if you do find that your machine starts to struggle with the higher resolutions or takes too long to generate the simulations, you can pull this down and it will speed things up. But as I say, you want to keep it as high as possible wherever you can. The next option is units, which we've already covered, where you can switch between millimeters and inches. And finally we have the job origin. And this is essentially the start position for your job or your zero position. Now wherever there is a circle you can move the job origin around to where you want it to start, and also in the center. The orange L simply indicates what is the area of positive coordinates, but you don't need to worry about this. 9 times out of 10 I will always start my job in the bottom left, and that's where I'm going to start today. So with those settings done, we'll now click OK. And it generates our work area. Now best practice kicks in here. As soon as you've created your file, make sure you save it. Go up to File, Save As, and put it in a suitable area that you want to save your job. Once you've given it a name, click Save, and this just guarantees that you at least have a base file that you are not going to lose.
Now this is the first hurdle where people often find it daunting. There are a lot of things on screen. It can seem a bit intimidating, but try and think of it like this. Imagine going into a DIY store. There are a lot of tools available to you, but you're only ever going to need 1 or 2 to get a particular job done. And that's the easiest way to think of this. There are a lot of things available to you, but to get from start to finish on each project, you're only going to need 1 or 2 at a time to complete them. And let's run through them all now to see where they all sit.
We're going to start with with the tools on the left hand side. This is basically your vector creation area or your vector manipulation area. If you're not familiar with the term vector, the easiest way to think of it is drawing lines and shapes that ultimately you can size as big or as small as you need to. So as we can see, we have some very basic tool options such as squares, circles, pentagons, and we also have a text option as well. At the bottom we have some tools for rounding off corners, for cutting lines, and also joining lines as well. Where options are grayed out, it is often because there is nothing on screen to work with them. Once we start drawing, these will come to life. I should also point out as well, as you hover over things, it will give you a name and a description of that particular tool, which can be useful. You'll also find all of the tools that are featured in the toolbars in the menu section. So as I mentioned, this is our vector area. So if we go up to vector, and we can start to see some of these tools, and then if we hover over create, for example, we can start to see the shapes, and actually we now get more shape options available within this menu. So the difference really is the toolbars are going to give you the most common tools that you will use, but there are others hiding within the menus. If we move to the very top, we have the menu system. You'll obviously be familiar with some of these, such as file and edit, where you have copy and paste options. The options menu that I showed you briefly earlier, this can be found at the bottom of the edit menu, should you want to change any of those settings that we adjusted earlier on. And then there are various other options within each menu. I won't drill into them at the moment, but we will slowly work through things as we do with the series. Probably most importantly, there is the help menu on the right hand side, taking you to various locations should you get stuck on anything in particular. Below that we have another toolbar. Now this toolbar is made up of multiple sets of tools. They are all individual sets divided by these grey lines in between. And I'll quickly run through what each segment is. The first one is simply save and undo. Obviously we've already saved our job, but we can continue to save throughout the project. Next is the undo button should we want to undo a tweak that we made to the design or something that we changed. Next is the vector and relief libraries. Now these can be very useful in the future. We won't use them today, but I'll quickly show you what happens when you open one up. Once you click on the folder, it will expand a menu out that gives you all of your relief library options. Now you can add and remove to this library as you go along, and if you haven't got anything in this library at the moment, I'll put a link in the description area from where you can download the full Carveco relief library. We will move on to 3D reliefs further into the series, but for now I will close this menu down. Next up we have the bitmap to vector tool. This will help you when trying to convert images or photos into files that you can machine. Next we have the vector doctor, and this is a brilliant tool for identifying and correcting issues within your vectors or drawings. For example, if you have two lines that do not quite meet up and they need to be joined, it will show you that there is an issue. If you have lines overlapping, it will also show you that there is an issue. We'll move on to this later on, but this is essentially where the tool sits. Next, we have a couple of options for multiplying our jobs. So for example, if we were doing something like a clock face and we wanted to repeat something 12 times in a circle, these are the types of tools that we will use. And then one that will paste it along a line should you want it to follow a specific shape. Next is the 3D relief tools. Now I'm not going to touch on these because I will save these for future episodes, but just to remind you, any of the tools you see here you can find up in the various menus such as edit, and we can start to see the same tools available here that are in this toolbar. And finally we get onto the toolpaths section. This is ultimately what we will use to generate the various toolpaths for doing our profile and pocket cuts and various things we will need throughout the series. We will see that simulation is grayed out at the moment, again because we have nothing on our work area, we can't simulate a job. But this relates back to the setting we adjusted at the start with the resolution. Because we have set it to a high resolution, our simulations will come out nice and crisp. Now before moving on to the right hand side, I'm just going to talk about the stage area and these two tabs that we have up here. We can see 2D and 3D view. Now whilst it is fairly obvious what the difference is between 2D and 3D, I will just explain a couple of things. You can design in 2D no matter whether you are in the 2D view or the 3D view. You can still work in your vectors in both of them. However, you will not be able to see anything in 3D in the 2D view. Now, whilst I know that sounds obvious, you will want to understand the differences between them in order to switch between views when you are trying to understand toolpaths, the way something is laid out, or how things are layered on top of each other. Now, in both of these views, we can zoom in and zoom out very easily by using the scroll wheel on your mouse. So you pull it back to zoom out and you push it forward to zoom in. And it will zoom in and out in relation to where your mouse is. So if I bring it over to the right hand corner, zoom out and zoom back in, it zooms there. If I move it further down this area and do the same, it's zooming out in relation to where that mouse is. Now if I zoom back out slightly and center this again, so we can also move our work area around in the space as well. By holding down the left and right mouse button together, we can then drag the stage around and position it where we want to. And then obviously we can also zoom back in. It is a very similar principle in the 3D view as well. Again, we can zoom in and out as required. We can hold both mouse buttons down and drag the stage around. And we can also rotate this around on a 3D axis by holding down the scroll wheel, clicking it down, and then rotating the plane. And we can start to see the difference now between the 3D views. Obviously this is flat at the moment, we have no depth to it. We will move on to this and set the depth of our material very shortly. And should you ever want to reset the view to the default, that is when we can now move over to this right hand toolbar and we've got a couple of options for the view. So we'll click this and it will reset back to the default view. And if we zoom all the way in, for example, we can reset the view level to fit the entire model. Now I should also point out that any tool with a little white arrow in the corner means there are extra tools sitting behind this. So if you click and hold your mouse button down, a pop-out will appear with the extra options available. Now in this case we have different viewpoints that we can select from, and if I select the one on the end, we'll see it automatically changed it to an isometric view. And then to reset back, we just hold it down again, go back to the default view. The other tools further down this menu is about displaying what is on screen. We can turn things on and off as we are working through our project. We can also fade the color in and out should we want more contrast on the job that we are working with if we are struggling to view anything. And on the right hand side we have a couple of panels, and this is where we will essentially start to build out our job. We can keep a track of the different layers and shapes that we are generating, as well as the different toolpaths that we are outputting as part of this particular job. A little bit further down we will also find some basic information about our work area that we've already set up. If ever you lose this, for example, if we click on bitmap and then we go back to project, it will bring up that base model information. And down the bottom we have our coordinate references. Now I mentioned earlier when setting the job up the difference between positive and negative coordinates, and I'll quickly show you the difference. Because we set our origin in the bottom left, it means everything in our work area is positive coordinates. You can see those x, y values are all positive numbers, whereas if I bring it in the opposite direction, we then go into negative numbers. This can be useful to know for any referencing or positioning of certain objects. And essentially these are also the same coordinates and measurements that your machine will be using to output the job. And down here in the bottom left we have the color palette. This can be very useful when you are converting bitmaps to vectors in order to output a job. For today's episode we will not be using it, but I just wanted to highlight where it is and what it is called. Now briefly showing you everything on screen. Should you lose any of these palettes by mistake, for example, let's close down this project palette and you want to get it back. The easiest way to do this is to go up to the Windows menu and click Reset Layout. And it reverts everything back to the default view. Now also under the Windows menu you can see the various toolbars and palettes, and you can turn these on and off by unticking or ticking next to the option. We just turned off the palette and you'll see the colors have now disappeared from the bottom, and we can also turn it back on. With the overview out of the way, let's move on and start to create something. First thing I'm going to do is come back to the 2D view, just so I find it slightly easier to draw on this white flat surface. The next thing I'm going to do is run through 3 of the drawing tools. We have the square or rectangle, the circle, or the ellipse. If you hold it down you can create ellipses as well. And finally we have the polygons or the stars. Again, click and hold down to create stars. So let's begin by just drawing a simple square. Now I'll select the rectangle tool, and up in the right hand corner we can see we have two choices, a rectangle or a square. Obviously by selecting square it will keep everything in the locked proportion, as opposed to a rectangle which will allow you to have different widths versus different heights. But we're going to stick with the square for now. And I'm quickly just going to draw one onto the drawing board by clicking and holding down the left mouse button and dragging. Now at this point you have a couple of choices. You can either manipulate the shape using the handles on the side. The lighter red ones will adjust the width or the height. The ones in the corners will add a corner radius, and the green one will rotate it. And we can do all of this also in the panel on the right hand side, and I'll quickly show you. So let's say we want this to be an absolute size of 50 millimeters. So we type in 50 and it locks both height and width to the same proportion and enlarges it up to that. And we want to add a corner radius as well to round off those corners. Now obviously this will take any value. Let's start with 10, but actually maybe that is a little bit too much, so perhaps bring this back to 5. And the good thing about this is it will update it live as you are typing your measurements, so you don't have to keep going back and forth. You can also invert the corners and make them into an inner radius, and I'll show you this as well. And it just inverts them into the other way, but for the purpose of today let's keep them as outer radius corners. And the next option is the center point, and this is about the position of the shape on your drawing board. Now this is all relevant to where you set the origin for your workpiece, or the 0. We set this to the bottom left hand corner, so all the coordinates in this box will be relevant to that position. And just to illustrate this, if I put 0, 0, we'll see it's moved the shape down to this bottom left hand corner. I'll drag it back into the center for now. And what we can also do, as I say, is rotate, either using the green handle dot or the rotation selection here, where we can put a specific rotation in. But again, for the purpose of this, we will leave it at 0. Now at this stage there are 3 ways to permanently create this shape. You can either click off the shape onto the drawing board, you can hit enter on the keyboard, or you can click create over in the side panel. If I click off to the side of the shape now, we will see that it turns to a pink color, and this means that your shape has now been fully created. One quick tip that I'm going to show you, I'm just going to draw another one out here very quickly. Now it looks the same as the other one did originally, but if I come over and select another shape, it will disappear. And the reason for that is because the shape has not been fully created yet. This is a mistake I've made many times, so whenever you draw a shape out, for example, always make sure you hit enter or click create to make it permanent. I will just quickly delete that one. And I'll also show you another quick tip. If you want to position your shape in the dead center of your work area, but you don't necessarily know the exact coordinates, you can select the shape and then hit F9, and it positions it right in the middle of your board. And just to prove that, we'll drag it off to a random position, hit F9 again, and it goes straight back to the center. Now when I say make your shape permanent or make your shape fixed, we can still come back and edit parameters of this. On the toolbar on the left hand side, there is a transform tool, which is the one with the spinning arrows around the center arrows. And you can either click that, or a faster option that I often use is to press T on the keyboard. And I'll quickly do that again. So I'll make sure my shape is selected, and then just press T, and we get the same transform menu come up on the right hand side. Now what we can do from this transform menu is edit some of the features that we just had, such as the size of it, the position of it. We can move it around and rotate it, and we can also shear it at the same time, where we can move 2 sides in relation to the opposite 2 sides to give it a bit of a slant. But for example, one thing that we can't do in this transform tool is to adjust the radius of the corners. So that is just something to bear in mind. And I should also point out that as you size it up or down, it will adjust the radius in relation. So if we take this up to 100 millimeters and click apply, we'll see that it has rounded the corners in the same ratio. So now this has probably gone up to a 10 millimeter radius as opposed to what it was originally, which was a 5 millimeter radius. So as I say, just little things to bear in mind as you are drawing. Let's delete this and move on to the circle tool. And I should point out you can simply delete shapes by clicking on them and hitting the delete button. Now we're going to select the circle tool and we get similar parameters again. We can control the circle center and we can control the circle size. So again, I'll quickly just draw something on the drawing board. And like the square or rectangle, the center will work on the same coordinates as we previously worked on. And we can also choose between a diameter or a radius. So we'll leave it on radius and we'll put this to 25 millimeters, and it is resized accordingly. Now, like before, we'll click create and make that a permanent shape. And again, should we want to edit something on that, we can always come up to the transform tool and we get the same parameters back that we did before. Now, an extra thing I will show you on this transform tool is whenever we were positioning the shape earlier, it was doing it from the center origin point of the shape. But let's say, for example, we want this bottom corner to sit in the bottom corner of the work area. We can come down, select that point as the origin position, and then type 0, 0, and click apply. And it puts that anchor point into the 0, 0 position. So you have got a couple of choices of when moving things about in relation to the anchor points on the shape versus the coordinates on the work area that you are in. So again, we will delete this shape, and now we'll come to the polygon tool. And a polygon is just a fancy name for a shape with multiple sides. And again, as soon as you select this shape, you have options on the right hand side. By default, it will do a 5-sided shape, a pentagon, but we can also take this up maybe to 10 sides. We can leave the angle as 0. Obviously, this is the rotation of the shape. Let's put the polygon center to 100. We'll make the radius 25 millimeters. And I have just realized this is creating at the very top of the work area, so maybe bring this down to 50. And essentially what we have just done is created that shape, but without drawing anything on the board itself. So slightly different to how we did it with the square and the circle. And again, we just want to complete it by clicking create and making that shape fixed in position. And the last shape I'll show you is a star. I know some of you love your flag, so it is quite a useful shape to be able to draw in relation to doing something like a flag. It is very similar to a polygon. I'm going to click on the polygon and move over to the star. Then we get the menu to the right where we can set how many points the star has, the angle or rotation of them, we can set the position of them, and crucially we can also set the radius of the first point and the second point. The easiest way to think of this is essentially the diameter or radius of the outside of the star versus the inside of the star. And if we try to draw it manually, we'll see what happens. The first time we click and drag, we will get the 5-side pentagon. This is the outer radius, or the first point radius it is called in the menu. Once we release the mouse, we will then get the option to do the second radius or the inner radius. Obviously it can technically be an outer radius as well if you go in that way, but usually you will do it as an inner radius. And as you will see as I'm pulling this in and out, the figures on the right hand side also adjust accordingly. So once we've created the shape, again we can click create just to make sure that it is now permanent. Now we've created a few shapes, and as you will have seen, there is nothing difficult about doing these. I'm going to show you one more tool for creating, which is the text tool, but first we will clear everything on the drawing board. Now using the mouse tool, I'm going to show you a very quick tip. If you are dragging from left to right, it will not select objects unless you select the entire object. So if I hold that there, you'll see that the polygon is selected, but the star is only partially selected, and it only picks the one object up. Now the difference is if you are dragging from right to left, it will select any object that red rectangle touches. So we can see there it is just touching both objects but not fully covering them, and when I release it, it selects both of them. So that is useful to know. It is often better to select things going from right to left, as that will pick up more objects. With those both selected, I'll hit the delete button. And then we're going to come over and select the text tool. And again, we have a panel on the right hand side with some very basic options. I'm going to click in the center of the drawing board for now. And I'm simply just going to type out my names. I often prefer text in capitals when doing smaller projects. And should we want to adjust this, for example, let's say we want to do 2 letters in a different font, highlight those, come up and select the relevant font that you want. Let's say we want to make the S bigger than the rest, we can select that, and again let's take that up to 80, and we'll clearly see there is a size difference. So that is one way to edit the text. Let's just delete that back out now. and add ES back in. Now another way to adjust the size is by using the anchor points around the edge. One thing I need to point out is as soon as you start enlarging the font using these anchor points, the actual size is less relevant because it is adjusting the entire collective shape as opposed to the actual font itself. And let me just demonstrate that. So if we drag this up to be, I don't know, approximately double the size maybe, and we highlight this text and we take that up and down, you'll see it is still picking this up as 45 point font. Now the reason that this is very important is if you are doing a design and the font needs to be at a certain size or scale, then do it correctly using this measurement as opposed to enlarging it with the anchor points. The anchor points are good for scaling things up and down very quickly. Let's say if you're just trying to maximize the size of the font versus the space you are working with. And if you are into your typography, there are spacing options to be able to adjust the gaps between the characters and the kerning. This is all about, like, let's say the gaps in between individual letters, the gaps in between individual lines can make things easier or harder to read depending on what you are trying to achieve. And like the shapes earlier on, when you are done with your text, you need to click create to make this happen. And that is your first piece of text created. Now again, like the shapes earlier, we can hit the T button and get some basic transform options to enlarge or shrink it, rotate it, that type of thing. We can also click on the T button and go back in, and this will allow us to continue editing the text itself. So once the text is created, it is still editable. The only caveat to that is if you break the text out into individual shapes, but we're not going to cover that in this episode. For today, we are just going to leave this as normal text that is editable.
So that is the end of part one. Hopefully everything feels a little bit friendlier now, a little bit more familiar, but don't let the tutorial stop there. Part two should be right here, so click on it and let's keep going.